Welcome back. So in this video we're going to work on a chopping board. Now I've decided to do a bamboo chopping board. Bamboo chopping boards are fairly popular, and the procedural texture that we'll create is actually going to be fairly simple, especially compared to something like a wooden texture, like the one you see in the background here with all the knots, the saw marks, all these little kind of wood wormholes, cracks and things like that. Definitely possible to create a texture like this procedurally. It's just very, very tricky and very, very time consuming. So we'll try a bamboo one, and we'll maybe look at doing a wooden one in a later video. Now the bamboo here, you can see the way the grain works. We've got on this side all these little dots, essentially in just a kind of uniform colour dots, and as it's sliced down, that creates the grain, and depending on how thick the dots are, how much of it has been cut through, you get thicker or thinner dots, and they're fairly uniform for quite long lengths down the side of this texture. And essentially the reason for that is it grows very straight, there's not a lot of distortion. You do have these areas here where you get some of these knots, and I'm not entirely sure how easy it's going to be to create something like that. We'll definitely have a go at it. But you can definitely see the look of the texture there. Now this chopping board itself has a few different layers. It's actually got 4 layers, alternating between dark and light. I believe on the other edge it will be more of a checker map kind of pattern, so you can see it alternates between dark and light, and again you can see just how the texture works here. Long kind of uniform grain with these odd kind of knots coming into play. So we're going to try and create the actual bamboo texture procedurally, and then we're going to use a checker mask to have lighter and darker versions of the bamboo node, or the bamboo node group, on our final chopping board. So let's move over to Blender, and I have the chopping board isolated. We'll do all the work on this in this video. We'll try and get the grain and everything right in grayscale first of all, and then we'll move on to colorizing it and creating the actual node. So as far as the first thing to do, let's create our material. Let's just call it bamboo. And there's a few different ways we can create this texture. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a noise that will basically recreate all these little dots, and then we can just scale it in one axis to create the grain. Very straightforward way to do it. I think we've actually done something fairly similar to that before. So let's first of all grab a noise texture, and we'll look at it in the render. And obviously it's all multicoloured, the mapping is off as well, so let's fix that first. Let's use Ctrl T to add our mapping nodes. I'm going to switch over to texture just because it's a little bit more intuitive to do it in texture, and I'm going to use object mapping, and you can see that maps everything to the surface of the object in a kind of more uniform way. You can definitely see the difference between generated and object on this particular one. You don't have to worry about UV in this. This is essentially going to be, you could think of it as a 3D texture. Doesn't matter what kind of shape or size of object you put it on, it's basically going to conform to that object the same way that the wood in this kind of looks like dots on this side. As you kind of curve around the object, it becomes the grain, and you can see that even more obviously here, where you have all these dots and you get there just to this curve, and it just starts becoming a grain before it turns back into dots. So essentially that's the texture we're going to work on. So let's first of all look at the mapping. So we want to scale this on the x-axis, so let's scale this up, and we start getting all these vertical lines. Now it's a little bit hard to figure out what's happening here because it's all kind of multicoloured. By default the colour and the noise texture is this kind of multicoloured noise. So let's grab a converter, colour ramp, and we'll plug this in, and that'll give us this black and white look. Now as far as the scale goes, let's increase the scale a fair bit, and we start to get all these kind of vertical lines. And if we look at this side, we've got a kind of noisy look. It's very cloudy though, unlike the actual kind of reference that we're looking for. It's not these dots, which kind of makes sense. We're just getting all these kind of grey, lots of various versions of grey lines, whereas here it's pretty much the same colours, but it's just thicker and thinner. They do fade off, but these seem to be a lot more uniform in colour. The only way we can really kind of recreate that would be to grab this colour ramp and essentially make the contrast a lot higher. So instead of having a lot of greys, we're pretty much having blacks or whites with a very few greys, and we just have to kind of tweak where we want these flags to kind of get that effect. Now, one problem with using the noise map for this is you'll notice that at the side of it, even when we increase the contrast, we don't really get dots. We get these kind of dark splodges. We've got a lot of blacks, but we've got a lot of these kind of cloudy grey bits all around, and it's not very uniform. Now, you could tweak things like the detail, but that's not really going to give you what you want either. So instead of using the noise texture, we're actually probably better off using the Voronoi texture. So I'm going to switch type, and that's Shift S. I'm going to go to my Voronoi texture, and we'll look at the result there. Now, bear in mind this is taking into account this colour ramp, so let's just put this back to its default. And you can see even actually before I put the white flag back, it's actually looking a lot better than the last one. In fact, it's very close to what we want. So let's just tweak these flags just a little bit. I just want to increase the contrast because, like I said, we don't want a lot of different kind of coloured lines. Let's bring in a little bit more black. So we're getting the dots that we want at the side. Now, some of these dots you'll see are kind of rings as opposed to actual dots. So let me add in another flag, and that gives me a grey flag halfway between the white and the black. And I'm just going to move that grey flag right to the very end. And that just basically tells the system to make the very blackest portions of this Voronoi map light again, and that gives the effect of creating these dots. Now at the moment we have linear mapping on. You might want to switch your mapping slightly and to see if something gives you something that's a little bit more interesting. Constant is definitely not the way to go. B-spline may be a little bit more useful, but you would have to add in another black flag, and the reason for that is the way it kind of figures out the shades that you're using. You almost never get any black because of the B-spline, the way that works. But if you do move them in just the right kind of position, you can get something that's a little bit more interesting. So what we have here is actually not too bad at all. We could definitely take some of these blacks and tweak them. We could also grab a converter, color ramp node, plug this in, and even just tweak them after the fact. Maybe bring in some more whites, bring in some more blacks, and get this to the way you want it. Now we're getting a lot of areas where we're getting a lot of white. Now the scale here actually looks not too bad at all. So I probably don't want to tweak the scale too much. If anything, let's maybe change it to something like 55 or 60 and see what happens. So we are getting a lot more of those white areas filled up. But the sides are maybe just the wrong size, so let's go back to 45, that's just about where it was before. And let's take this scale here and change it to about 150. Now that basically makes these lines go a bit further, and we can see some of them starting and stopping. Let's change that again, let's try 300. And that seems to be working okay. Now one way we can try and fill in these areas would be just by tweaking some of these location values a little bit. But one thing to bear in mind is when you actually use this texture on a different object, changing the location value might not necessarily fill in these gaps. So one way to go with this would be actually to duplicate all these nodes. So let me just grab all those nodes, use Shift D, duplicate them down. And what we want to do here is we actually want to keep the sides where they are and just add some more detail in the top. So let's add these together and just increase that mix all the way up. And let's use multiply, just because that will get rid of the whites but keep the blacks. And in one of these locations, let's just change this location. So we've moved that to almost 100 units up and down, and it's changed quite a lot. We're getting a lot of big black areas here, so we probably want to get rid of those. Because we're doing some variation, let's tweak the scale as well. So let's take that down to about 150. We can also take out some of the blacks a little bit just by moving these flags a little bit. And let's tweak this as well. I think that's given us a little bit more of an interesting look. One thing I maybe want to change is these scales. I think 300 is actually too much, so let's change that one to 150. And let's change this one to, say, 100. And that gives us a little bit more variation. So we have some darker areas and some lighter areas, and that's actually a little bit closer to what we have here. You can see that this texture here, where we get thicker or darker areas, is actually getting a bit closer to there. So you maybe just want to tweak some of these values just a little bit and try and get as close to that as possible. I don't want to switch that scale. Now one thing is we have all these little dots here and they're now overlapping. We don't really want to have these overlapping. So one other thing I might want to do is actually just scale on these a little bit on one axis. Now I think we're going to keep the darker one. So let me scale this just a little bit, just to about 2 or so. So they're actually, see, that's actually messing up the top now. Let's just keep that the way it is. Now what I want to do is mask off the sides of this. So we're going to plug in a mask in this factor. And we're going to basically mask off the top from the rest of it. And it's very easy to do that. We just go Input, Geometry, and if we look at normal, you can see the top normal is blue and everything around the sides is a completely different colour. That essentially allows us to mask off the top of it completely. So we have to get all those blues and make them white, and really easy to do that. Again, separate RGB, and we're going to grab the blue output, and you can see that we get this nice mask where we've got the top being completely white, and as it goes down the edge it just kind of fades off. So let's plug this in to our factor and see what the result is. And everything seems to be plugged in the way it is, the way we want it, because we're keeping the side the way we want it, and the top is using both versions of this, so that's working fine. Now we are getting a little bit at the edge where it's just fading in, so let's grab a converter, color ramp. You'll find that the color ramp is probably one of the most useful nodes in Blender. And let's just tweak this and see if we can get rid of this a little bit. So let's grab the black node, the black flag instead, and bring that up. We can just start to fade that out a little bit. Let's see, something like that, it should be okay. And that's not looking too bad. The sides aren't looking too bad either. And looking at the scale of it, I might have just been a little bit off. Maybe we do want to increase that a little bit. So let's see, something like 60. Yeah, let's just go for that, 60. And essentially that's our basic texture. In the next video we'll work on colorizing this, and we'll turn it into an actual node group.